You guys know. Why don't you know? Listen up. We're coming up with a. You guys are coming up. You and James with a world map quiz. Do I? Yeah, just write it wherever. Countries you know that he didn't put there yet. I said, hey, what countries do you know? And he started writing them down. And that will be what I'm quizzing everybody. What day is today? Have you noticed the shirt? See flamingos? See, I did that for you. Now, the tough thing about this is the grandeur of the light can sometimes be overshadowed by the rat. Do you agree? Are we ready? Anybody? Drum roll. Thank you. Yes, there we go. Come on, give it something. Give it something, everybody, for Flamingo Friday. That was pretty good. I don't know if you deserve Flamingo Friday anymore.
Wait, what about the cat vibing music? Did you get that?
What?
The vibing music.
Oh, we don't get cat vibing music.
What?
We don't get. You're not ready for cat vibing music.
But we got it in special.
You'll get it in special topics. Yeah, but not here. All right, so let's go and get back to. All right, so I asked you to look at this, and why did Jefferson, or Adams, and first off, why did Jefferson put this in there? But also, why did Adams and Franklin just literally, we can't have this? I mean, they really were just freaking out when they saw this. Now, the grievances listed out a bunch of stuff, and some of them, they all knew the king did not do it. So they knew they were exaggerating. But this, wow. This also tells you a lot about Thomas Jefferson. So, I asked you to read this. It has a cool beginning. I like that. Actually, in the original, it was, he hath, H-A-T-H. He has waged a cruel war against human nature itself. What is Jefferson blaming the king for? Slavery. So when you get to the draft, go and drive down to your notes, the draft of the Declaration, say he's going to blame the king for slavery. This is the cruel war. He's blaming the king. He already blamed the king for slave rebellions. He blamed the king for the woodland nations fighting along the frontier. And now he's blaming the king for slavery. And I love how he puts that. He has waged a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant person who never offended him. So, a distant person. And I should add, Jefferson is acknowledging that slavery is a war against human nature. It's violating its most sacred rights. He is saying slavery did this, or slavery is doing this. Remember what Jefferson is, how Jefferson makes a living. Well, and Jefferson, he did make his money the old-fashioned way. What's the old-fashioned way? Inherited. They had a big inheritance. And persons of a distant people who never offended him, then the king captivating them, carrying them into slavery into another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death through transportation thither. Thither is a word I wish we still used, but it means to them. That's the middle passage. So according to him, who's capturing the slaves and kidnapping them? The king. Then what did the king do? Personally, ship them in the horrific middle passage across the Atlantic Ocean and put them into slavery. The king did this. Now, do you remember when the first African slaves arrived in the Western Hemisphere? Who brought the first African slaves? Or who started using the first African slaves from Africa? Remember, part of this whole international slave trade? Who? Yeah, the Spanish. We're talking back about 1508. When did the first African slaves, we know for certain, arrive in the 13 colonies, aka Jamestown? Oh, a date from way back when. 1619. And what did he blame the king for? He blamed the king, King George III, for capturing the slaves. So obviously back for the Spanish and then in Jamestown and bringing them over. How old is the king? And he's a busy guy, isn't he? Capturing and kidnapping people and bringing them over. Before he was alive, he was doing this. That's how determined he was to force slavery on the continent. Did you catch that? He was not alive yet. And they said, the king. He. They didn't say Britain, they said he. Wow. The king who was not yet alive was capturing slaves and bringing them over. Then it gets even better. This piratical, it's a word I wish it was still around, pirates. So he's saying that the slave trade is nothing different than kidnappers, pirates, the worst criminals imaginable. That's slaves, by the way. Moving on. The opprobrium, another word of this is what they do, essentially. It's gone now. Of infidel powers is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain. So implying that Christians would never do this, but infidels, meaning non-Christians, would. Basically, when he said infidel, they're talking Muslims. There are still legacies. Heck, the last crusade was only 150 years before this. And Christians would never enslave people. But the Christian king was doing this. Was that true? Was that true? Absolutely not. Determined to keep an open market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. Prostituted? Okay, I'm not talking about prostitution, not a prostitution as a noun for an occupation. I'm talking about prostituted as a verb. Anybody know what that means? Anything for money. Anything for money. So to get rich. Read that last sentence again. Everyone look at that last, you can see it on there, on yours or up here. Prostituted is negative for suppressing every legislative attempt. He's implying that the colonial assemblies were doing what? And the king wouldn't let them do it. You know? Taking the, as we said, piratical? Yeah, what?
Trying to stop slavery.
That's what we have to get. And then he says that the colonial assemblies were trying to stop slavery, but the king would not let them do it. They're trying to stop it. Were the colonial assemblies trying to stop slavery? Absolutely not. Have they ever tried? Absolutely not. None of them did. Oh, sure, there were a few people who thought slavery was wrong, immoral. There are a few that thought we shouldn't have it, including Ben Franklin. But there was no effort in any one of these colonies to stop slavery. I mean, to actually stop it. But according to Jefferson, the king had captured all the slaves, brought them over, and then were not allowing the colonists to get rid of them. So basically, he's forcing the slave owners to keep their slaves. Jefferson doesn't want his slaves, but the king is making him. Boy, that is one evil man. So he captured the slaves before he was born and then forces the people to keep the slaves. No matter what they do, they can't get rid of them. Wow. And then, this assemblage of whores might want no fact of distinguished dye. Okay, that's a really complicated way of saying, and guess what else he did? You're not going to believe this. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people on whom he has obtruded them. Wow, that's a statement. So what is he encouraging the slaves to do now? Citing those very people to rise in arms among us. What is he encouraging the slaves to do? Rebel. So this is the next thing. So the king is now encouraging slave rebellion. Now there's a tiny element of truth. What did Lord Dunmore do? What did he do about slaves? Say it loud, John. Yeah, they join the British, they get free. And that there's a tiny element of truth there. Because they are going to fight, therefore, against patriots. But he said, now get this, understand this. The king brought the slaves over, forces them to have them, and then encourages them to rebel. Wow, what a plot! And then it says, whom he has Actually, it was written as he hath obtruded them. Obtruded is force. So, this is what Jefferson has said. The king brought the slaves over, forces many of the colonists to have slaves. They try to get rid of it, but they won't allow them. And then the king turns around and has them all out. Boy, that king is diabolical. For over 100 years before he was born, he was planning to bring slaves over, force the colonists to have slaves, just so they could rebel. That's a master plan. That's brilliance. What would we call this today besides insane? This is a long thought out crime. Because we don't know it's true, but it's a theory. What?
I was going to say delusional.
Well, yeah.
Conspiracy?
It's a conspiracy theory. The whole thing is a conspiracy theory. You have to believe. You just basically have to say, you know, reality sucks. I'm going to go with this. That is much better. They didn't want slaves. Therefore, Jefferson can say, aren't I a good guy? I didn't want slaves. And it seems wrong. But the king made me. So it finishes with, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people, the slaves, with crimes he urges them to commit against the lives of another, the slaveholders. And that is what Jefferson was going to put in the Declaration of Independence. This is a little bit longer than the other ones. Most of them they shut down. So, why did Adams and Franklin literally cross out, cut holes into the paper with their pens when they were driving down? There's a few reasons. Yeah. What's that? Okay. Now that might be for other ones, but not Adams and Franklin. Adams and Franklin didn't have slaves. Adams didn't like slavery, and Franklin would have liked to emancipate or get rid of slavery. Now, that didn't mean they were actually doing anything actively, but they didn't have slaves. Even though it's a good guess, and you can imagine other people did. Yeah, go ahead.
They wanted to maintain the status quo because by keeping slavery, they keep the southern states on their side.
That's the biggie. That's what you have to get down. It's the southern states. If they put this out here and say that slavery is wrong, if slavery is wrong, it's immoral, we shouldn't be doing it. So the British are forcing it on us, this immoral act. Once we get our independence, what does this imply? What does this imply they have to get rid of? Slavery. Did everyone catch that? If slavery is so bad, and look at it, it's a crime. It's a war against human nature. We got to get rid of it. And that might break up the whole entire thing. And they say it again. Well, here's the thing that's so interesting about this. This is before the country was even created when he wrote this. And they knew what was going to break it apart. They knew it in Philadelphia. They knew it then. Before there's a United States, they knew slavery was the issue. And Adams and Franklin are looking at this saying, this will blow the whole thing up. This will blow the whole thing up. And so, they believe slavery is immoral, but they make a deal. You catch that? It's called a Faustian bargain. They make a deal with the devil. You won't mess with slavery to save the United States. And then we'll kind of hope it goes away. Would it go away? Not the way they hoped. And so, that is the key. No, we'll divide the whole thing up. Yeah, I wonder how many times that deal is going to be made in American history. Or a deal like that. Or in all history of every country, but this is American history. And one more thing. You're saying all men are created equal, and slavery, therefore, is a direct violation of our equal, unalienable rights. What might this encourage? More slaves to join whom? Won't they join the British? Yeah. This might encourage what they're actually worried about. Slave rebellion and slaves just leaving and running away to freedom because they actually kind of want to be free. What an amazing bit to put in there. What does that tell you about Jefferson? Huh?
He was a better person.
He was a better person? Was he a better person? Did he ever get rid of his slaves? No. He lived off the back of their labor until he died. He lived a life of luxury on the blood and sweat of humans. And of course had many children. Yes.
You're asking what I was going to say is hypocritical and manipulative.
That's very good. I was coming back to that. Does he sound like a hypocrite? He knew slavery was wrong, and yet he was unwilling to get rid of it himself. This is kind of him hoping to be forced into an answer he knows we need to have. We need to deal with this problem of slavery now. We need it. Then it's not going to happen. And he won't do it. So he's kind of hoping maybe to backdoor it and not like his conscience talking, because he knows how immoral he is. But once again, I repeat, we can go back and say, I hate Jefferson now because he was a horrific slave owner. Yeah, but he's dead. So we can hate a corpse, that's fine. It's our job to look at this and say, okay, the Declaration of Independence is pretty amazing. And Jefferson was responsible for that. We can read it to have so much about human equality. That's a big deal. Something for Americans to be proud of. And Jefferson deserves the credit. We just can't forget to condemn him and learn from not mistakes, his horrific greed and what that led to. We can learn from it because they're gone. It doesn't do any good to say, I hate, I'll never learn about Jefferson. No. We learn from the good and bad. That is our job. It always bugs me when people look back at someone in history and say, well, they did something wrong, so we can't ever talk about them. They're evil. Are you kidding me?
Why they can be talking about to avoid their mistakes.
I'll give you another example. There's going to be a man by the name of Andrew Jackson who has a lot of very bad things. He also saved the country. And he represents democracy. We got to learn from him. And we can condemn the bad parts and look at the good things, and that's good. Everybody has good and bad elements, except for us in here. We only have one. Good, justice, altruism. All right, who agrees with me? Yeah, see, I like some good, yeah, that's me. I'm one. All right. So, if I ask you about the draft of the Declaration of Independence, does everyone know I'm referring to this? If I ask you this on the test, I'll talk about the Declaration of Independence, if I just a question about slavery and the draft. You good on this? All right, let's go take your notes out there. Or the rest of the notes, you can put this away. And if you guys are a little discouraged about that kind of scary part of history, think of the rat.
Well, the rat's also part of some of the scary parts of history. The plagues.
You're blaming the rats for the plague?
That rat.
Like the rats had a choice.
I'm blaming that rat specifically.
No, blame the.
It's not the rats are going, hey, let's start the plague.
That rat specifically.
Blame the.
He's the rat.
Yeah, well, the rats didn't have any medical
He's the
data.
rat.
They
They
got
got told
us
everybody,
specifically.
all the other rats, just.
Yeah, that
You
rat.
did, not that rat.
No, he caused the plagues. He caused it.
Okay, where do we finish it here? Because I'm now, like I told you, I'm in a different spot in every class.
There were.
Civil War, did we get to the Civil War part? All right, let's go right from there. So, this is Civil War. So think about this euphoria. We're independent. We are now independent nation. The patriots, even though they're still a minority of the population, they have this feeling that we've accomplished something. And that handbill I showed you is spreading throughout the colonies. We are independent, and loyalists are they're shut up. They're quiet. The huge statue of George Washington in this center square of Manhattan was torn down. That's not all buildings today, but where the square was. Actually very close to where the Twin Towers were. And it's right where that tower, where that statue was. And then the British invade with 30,000 men. Not a big deal. It happens. While this is going on, General William Howe was up here in Halifax, starting the biggest amphibious operation in British military history up to that time. It's not D-Day, but pretty big. By the way, amphibious, that's a landing from sea to land. That's amphibious. hundreds of ships, over 30,000 soldiers. And these are regular soldiers, well-trained, ready to go. And they're going to attack New York. Why New York? One of the most important cities of the few cities there, but here's the biggie. You notice it's kind of in the middle, and it isolates New England. Remember, everything had to kind of go by the shore. There were no roads. So they take New York, New England is cut off, and the thought was we could save everything else and then deal with New England, Boston, when we want to. And so that's the plan. Washington knew it. But Washington maybe had 1,500 relatively trained forces that he brought down. The rest of them were, he couldn't really bring down, age, whatever reason, for the militia. He came down here, eventually would have over about 15,000 men. He was there waiting for him. So while the euphoria of independence was happening, Washington is sitting there in New York waiting for invasion. He knows. And they hit. End of the month, the first ships arrive in New York Harbor. The first ships arrive. And Washington is overwhelmed and he knows it. And that's leading to a series of battles around New York. I meant to put General and Admiral Howe. That's why I put the comma, then I forgot to type in Admiral, I got tired. So, the Howe brothers were in charge. William Howe was the commanding general, General Howe, and his brother was the commander of the Royal Navy, of that squadron there. So the Howe brothers were in charge. This will have impact down the road. And they sailed down and landed in Brooklyn. So that right there is Long Island. That map, if you look over here really quick, it's right here. It's basically just where my finger is, showing that area. Long Island, especially this western part, is all people now. It's Bronx, Queens, that area of New York City. New York City, back then, was only on Manhattan Island. Right here. Here today is Brooklyn. This was called the Brooklyn Heights. That's Queens, Bronx, Staten Island's right here. And the Royal Navy came in, they landed first on Staten Island, so they began to organize. And then their plan was, okay, they want to isolate New York. So they're going to land in Long Island and come behind and land on Manhattan. So they land on Long Island. Washington makes a terrible mistake. He thinks, I got to fight him there. I can't sit back and wait, especially my militia are untrained. They might, if we sit there and wait, they might leave. And so Washington crosses over. He's only got 10,000 men. The British have over 30,000 crack troops. And all of Washington's men none of them, have had the training that the British have had. And that will lead to the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. And potentially one of the most important battles of the war, because Washington really screwed up a number of times. So Washington, he never fought with armies this size. He fought along the frontier using the tactics I told you about in the French and Indian War. Now he's got to fight kind of a set-piece battle. Well, there's these heights here, the Brooklyn Heights. Today, if you go to Brooklyn, it's all people, and so you kind of walk up this little height. There's a couple plaques there. That's it, because it's just just people everywhere. City Field's right here. That's what the Mets play. There's my one little baseball thing. The Giants and Jets play right about here. Moving on. So Washington put his forces here to guard, but he did something that he would do time after time. He understood, okay, they're there, they're in front of me, I'm going to block the main areas of their march. He never protected his flank. That's called a hanging flank. He had this problem for the entire war. He never really understood, he couldn't see like the 3D image of it. And rotten maps, and part of the problem was he didn't have enough men to do anyway, so it was a terrible mistake, but leaving his flanks hanging could lead to disaster. And Howe was a competent, good general who outnumbered him. So Howe attacked here, but then sent a third of his men under his best, or one of his best generals, William Clinton, went around and hit the flank. So think about hit like that. The men are facing this way, and all of a sudden here comes 10,000 British soldiers. And what did the militia do when they're coming from their side? They ran. The whole Continental Army collapsed. The only thing that saved Washington's army is they attacked in late afternoon and it got dark. That's the only thing that's safe. And they retreated here and dug in, and it's over. If Howe would have aggressively attacked right there, Washington's army would have been destroyed. And the Revolutionary War would have ended. And that's where the British are going to make their terrible mistake. So, we're talking islands now, 2 little islands. Right here is where the Hudson River meets the sea. The strait between Manhattan Island and Long Island. The strait, if you go there, it's called the East River. It's not a river, but that's what everyone calls it, the East River. All the British had to do was put a couple ships right here. And Washington's bottled up. And it's over. It's over. But it was stormy. Straits are notoriously rugged seas. Oh, jumping right here. And so, the Royal Navy, Admiral Howe just had to put 2 or 3 frigates, and the Declaration of Independence would have been nothing more than a footnote in British history. If that. No one would have known the Declaration of Independence. It would have been over. And that's how close it was. But they didn't. And so Howe was getting ready to attack, and Washington ordered all his men to light campfires. Why? Every night they lit campfires to cook their dinner. Yeah.
To make it look like there's more men than there actually are.
Good guess, but look, it's a deception, but it's a slightly different one. Yeah.
Just to make them like they're unprepared.
They're unprepared?
To make them look like they're unprepared.
That's another form of deception, but it's a different deception. There are good answers, yeah.
To guide the ships over there.
Good answer too, but no. Oh, great answers on that, yeah.
To make it look like
The men were still there. They lit their campfires like they're going to be there tonight, and then he pulled them all back to the water. And so Howe did not realize that the Americans had fled. I'd say the Americans, I should say Continentals. The colonists did not yet call themselves Americans. So if I say that, I'm sorry, it's inappropriate. I mean, it's just wrong because that's not what they called them yet. And so the next morning, Howe found nothing but empty camps and smoldering campfires. All good forms of deception, but that's what happened. And they had the men from Rhode Island who were whalers row the big rowboats, whaleboats over and save. All they would have needed is 1 or 2 frigates, small, fast ships there, and Washington's army would have been destroyed. But Washington escaped. And that's one of the other great what-ifs in history. Just like Quebec I told you about. A few things differently. A few things happened differently, and the United States would not exist. It was that close. There's a bay right there called Kipps Bay, so this is sometimes referred to as the Miracle of Kipps Bay. Washington fled across. Here's a postage stamp they made. I thought this was kind of cool from 1951. So Washington did his army in Brooklyn. That's a cool one. No, I don't have it. I found the picture. And so with that, New York fell very quickly afterwards. He escaped, and Washington knew he couldn't hold it and began to retreat. The British tried to land and cut him off and failed. Washington made another terrible mistake. He should have burned down the wooden piers and docks in the harbor so the British couldn't use it. He forgot. In fact, literally, the story is he's riding along and it's like, oh, should have burned down the docks. But when the British were landing, somebody kicked over a lantern and they burned down. Washington kind of had this charmed life, even though he kept making mistakes. Remember Fort Necessity? He has this thing. He comes out of these sometimes looking better, and he shouldn't. Washington's men fled up Manhattan Island. Howe followed them pretty aggressively, and there's going to be a battle right here called Harlem Heights. It was kind of a rear guard action. The British won, but the important thing is Washington's men fought better. Even though he still had the problem with the flanks, they fought better. Same thing with the battle that's going to be right about here, called White Plains. Same deal. They fought better, but still lost. The point is, Washington is learning, but slowly, and still making terrible mistakes. And this is going to be the lowest point. They fled up into New York, and Washington realizes we can't go into the howling wilderness here. And so he crossed over the Hudson and flee across New Jersey. Every night his army begins to bleed away. as men realizing that the cause is lost as they saw it, and they begin to go home. Remember, these are almost all militia, and they go home. Soon he just has a couple thousand men with him. And he made terrible mistakes, like not evacuating half of his gunpowder and cannon out of 2 forts, Washington and Lee. And the British took him. So he lost half of his gunpowder. The story is, as he watched the British take Fort Washington, he started to weep, just uncontrollable, out of kind of a rage, and well, the cause might be lost. So think about what happened. You have July, we're independent, we made it. 2 months later, it's all over. And going into the fall, John Adams is in the floor of what we call Independence Hall today, demanding Washington be fired. He's incompetent. He's a fool. In fact, they want to put a retired British general named Charles Lee in charge, who really was incompetent and a fool. But the British became complacent. You can see how. War's over. It's winter. Tough to fight in the winter. It's wet. Hard to use gunpowder. We'll get him in the spring. So we let him escape. If he would have aggressively followed, it would have been over. And this is where we have to get to a key part. What were the advantages they had? This really came apart where it shows all the British advantages, but it also shows the big colonial advantage. So let's look at the combatants. We have the British and the colonials. The combatants. There are advantages and disadvantages. Because this showed the British could pretty much go anywhere they want and win every battle. But as we know, if you look ahead in U.S. history, the United States survived. If you look ahead, if you read ahead, if you peek to the back of the book. So look at the British advantages. They had more people. They had a stable government, not this ad hoc thing. They had a real system of currency and specie. They could borrow money and issue bonds, and people trusted it. Boy, the Continental Congress bonds. They had to give so much interest. This was a huge albatross around their neck. Small, but experienced, well-trained army, and the biggest name in the world. It's going to be a civil war. They're loyalist militia, and therefore spies everywhere. Most of the tribes are the woodland peoples, the woodland nations, especially the Iroquois. They joined the British fearful of colonial expansion. You can see how the tribes are desperately trying to pick which side will help them out. And then, of course, all over the colonies, but especially the southern ones, there's a group of people that the British can recruit, enslaved people. And you look at all that, and there's more. That's a huge advantage. But it doesn't give somebody a reason why they're fighting. I mean, let me ask you a good question. Would anybody here want to volunteer for the British Army and fight in the colonies? Anybody here want to volunteer to potentially take a musket ball in the face so they can get higher tax revenues from the colonies? I sweetened the pot there with higher tax revenues. Come on, people, who's with me? Higher tax revenues, let's go.
So long as it hits me in the face and I die quick.
I don't think it'll happen that way. And even then, you would be willing to die quick for higher tax revenues. By the way, there's always somebody who's crazy who might do it, but look at the Continentals. So the Continentals, the now states, once again, I refer to them as colonies, I shouldn't. Washington had flaws, but he was a leader. Wow, was he a leader? I'll show you in a sec. And France might join. They don't have to bring their supplies across the Atlantic, especially food. It's right there. Also, think about the cause. Now, the cause might not be enough to actually actually potentially get killed. But liberty is something they could feel, they could understand. But if there's another cause, they didn't attack the British, to their point of view. They didn't attack the mother country. They're attacking us. We're defending. We're on the defensive, and it's our homes. It's home field. We know the land. We can defend, and that's a great cause. It's our home. We didn't attack them. They attacked us. Even if you don't care, they're still going to attack your home. That's a cause. And lastly, more important, Washington is going to lose almost every battle. He was absolutely humiliated at Brooklyn Heights, defeated at Harlem Hills and White Plains, had to flee across New Jersey, yet the war goes on. And that's something the British never understood, really. And Washington took a long time. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to survive. He just needs to survive. Britain has to totally defeat the Patriot cause. As long as Washington's army's in the field, and the other armies, but Washington was most important. Washington's army, how many more countries do you have?
Probably like double one.
Okay, that's about perfect. Yeah. And they just have to survive. Because, add one more word, contrary to what anybody says, and I will say this over and over again because it's a truism that people forget, the PE classes must have went biking. There's a whole line of bikers going right there. So maybe I'll tell you about my biking experience here. But back to this. Okay, I was distracted by bikers. This is why I can't ever have class outside. Huh? Well, let me get back to my class outside. Now I'm on a tangent. Just deal with it. We try to do class outside because, you know, when it's really nice. Wouldn't that be fun to sit outside? No. What happens?
You did.
Well, me especially, but everyone else, like bird, squirrel. Me especially, bird. And then that's it. And
You just birding.
yeah, I just start naming birds. So back to this. A truism. Wars are political. Wars are political. Who has the political will to survive? Who can take the losses and the loss of treasure in human beings? And eventually the British will say we've had enough. Go home. Washington didn't need to win the battles. He just needed to win the war. This is exactly what could have happened in the Civil War if the Confederates would have done it. They could have easily won. They almost did. The United States, many countries are going to lose wars like this. The U.S., we will lose a war like this and win almost every battle and lose the war because we're going to go home in a civil war in South Vietnam. It will happen in your lifetime. Afghanistan, we lost because eventually we went home and they won. We lost in Iraq. We went home and left a government that's pro-Iran, which was the exact opposite of what we wanted. We lost. You're going to talk about that?
Sure.
And so, Washington didn't need to win. He just needs to survive. And so, he's escaping across New Jersey. You guys, does this work for you guys? You don't like that? Is that your way of saying you want me to draw it? Is that your way of saying that?
Absolutely.
All right, let's draw it. Yes! That did fall once. That's my third screen. I've broken 2 screens by waving a ruler around, pointing, and I just went right through it. Let me draw. We need brown. I got a brown pen. So I'm going to draw you New Jersey. Who's been in New Jersey? Aha! Moxie quiz. Okay. Or New Jersey. New Jersey. I'm drawing this area right here. So up here, this is New York. Philadelphia. So Philly, New York. Just imagine that's a Y. New Jersey. There was a postal road that turned to be pretty straight. Think about it, like 2 wagon routes. That's all it was. Now, there's no bridges over any rivers. Here is the Delaware. See the Delaware? Delaware. It's really windy. So there's a ford. Right at the ford was a place called Trenton. And then the road, they forded the river and went to Philadelphia. Continental Congress, who's flipping out? Washington's fleeing across this road. Fortunately, General Howe thought the war was over. And so they went into winter quarters. So he's following very slowly. He should have aggressively followed. He could have ran Washington's army to the ground. A third of Washington's men were, had no shoes. They wore them down to nothing. They're going barefoot or just rags on their feet. They didn't have winter gear. They were out of food. Men were bleeding away every night, deserting. But Washington straggled to Trenton, crossed, and built his camp right here. That's supposed to be a square. So there's Washington. What they did is, along major cities here, the British just put a garrison to hold out, and in the spring, once the rains end, they'll drive them out. Now, that was the furthest most outpost, and I was thinking, I don't want to put British soldiers there. They already have a tough enough life. I want to keep their morale up. Let's put mercenaries. What's a mercenary? Yeah.
Someone who's paid to fight, but usually
Yeah, they're not loyal to the country they're fighting for. Because clearly the United States military is a professional army now and they're paid to fight. But they're also implicitly they're loyal to the country. Mercenaries are loyal to what? Money. Well, these aren't quite the mercenaries you would think. These are mercenaries from a little tiny principality in what is now Germany. It's written right there. Have you been there?
Yeah.
You been there?
Yeah.
What have you been there?
Hessen. It's like, it's a, just a place, I don't know.
Yeah, just a place.
I just haven't been there, I guess.
So Hessen was just a principality, used to be an independent little kingdom. What's conscription? We don't call it conscription here, but they call it there. Yeah. Yeah, we call it what? The draft. It's a thing. The draft for conscription is join the army, go to prison. That's the draft. He conscripted an army, they wore nice green uniforms, and he sold the men to the British. So the men weren't getting the money. Who's getting the money? The king. Can you imagine the morale of those guys? You gotta be kidding me. They're paid nothing. They're forced into the army, and now they're sent to the howling wilderness of this place. They're in New Jersey, and they're in Trenton, which just seemed like in the middle of nowhere, and they're occupying the people who hate their guts. Nobody likes an occupied army. Remember the quartering of the troops? Imagine an occupied army that speaks a different language. And so there were insults yelled. They couldn't trust them. Well, in American history, Hayes said it's going to become the Hessians. Don't ask. It's just the Hessians. In American history, I know it's totally mispronouncing it, but just go with it. The Hessians, then, they're calling them a bunch of dirty Dutchmen and yelling at them. That was meant as a major insult. I'm not really sure how that's a big insult. Why do they call them Dutchmen? Well, okay, German is English. How do you say Germany in German? Deutsch, Deutschland, Deutsch, Dutch. The Dutchman. Good thing you knew that. Yeah. So, the Dutch. That's an insult. So Dutch meant German. Just, I know a little about the context. So, the men were miserable. And they were told going into the cold winter. Think about 30 to 35 degrees all the time. Snow, sleet, wet, and really humid. Okay, 30 might not seem that cold, but if you're outside all the time, it's really cold. And secondly, have you been in a winter where it's really humid? I mean, here, it gets cold, but we don't have that much humidity. 30 degrees when it's 90% humidity, it just cuts you to the core. So, they heard they're going to have a Christmas celebration. Now, Christmas, and actually, I told you about Christmas before. That was a 12-day drop, right? So what was this? They were going to give them one day, Christmas Day. They're going to ship them a bunch of alcohol, and they can act like they're not, as they saw it, in the wild wilderness. I know the most about reading. Let me finish this real quick. In the wild wilderness. Patriot spies heard about it, and they told Washington. and Washington's dissolving army, he knows he needs something. And he said, what a perfect time to attack those couple thousand Hessians. When to attack? So on Christmas Day, they're going to drink. When do you attack? Yeah. Just at sunup on the 26th. Why? Because they'll all be passed out in hunger. And so Washington's going to attack. And this will be one of the turning points in American history. We can finally beat those dirty, rotten Dutchmen. What? Did you say yay? Yay! Down with the Dutchmen. Oh, all right, so yeah, we'll finish this up tomorrow, Monday. I'm giving you the weekend. Everyone say goodbye to the light.
Bye.
Goodbye. Is that sad?
Very.
But it'll always be here. Let's see the list. All right, this will be your job on Monday.
What?
No, me, the rat, and the flamingo. Lower Flamingo is so far.
Really small ones there.
We'll put a couple of them. Hey, everyone, goodbye for the weekend. Yes.
Okay, buddy.
And no games in Good, that's perfect. That's what we want. I'll go through. I might add a couple more. For world history, I thought I had one made, so I was going to pull it. I didn't have it.
You're gonna be, Aaron, you're gonna be 90 on your.
So probably the end of next week. I'll give you in advance. So you do it as you please. Cool. Sound good? It's got work to do. Let's go.
Failed a vocab test.
In what class?
English.
I'm sorry.
I got 4 out of 10. That is depressing.
Wow.
But it's only 10 points, right?
It's worth. That's how many questions.
Oh. Hey, yeah? That's all right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's. Well, let's not get tired, because we still have to turn the light on, too.
It's just as beautiful as that. Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, they voted early and voted often. Yeah.
If I have big.
The
Okay,
funeral
whatever
march.
Lacey told you is not true. Like, I did say that her just cars, but I just think she could drive a truck. I had to see chains flying down the road. Like, I've been here.
Oh, you were at your flamingo shirt.
Oh, I thought you meant from here, because I was like, chat, I could, but.
How do you say chat?
Don't do that. Don't do that. And us people with English heritage, literally English heritage, know that. Like if you walk through the streets of Edinburgh and did that, it would be a crimson.
Also,
I've done that in so many pictures. I didn't tell them to shake their things over Facebook.
I know people do that all the time and don't know what they're doing. But I'm just telling you, like Britain, wow, all the way around. That's how you get in fights.
He would know what's
Don't say that. You know, I'm so mad.
I suppose.
Was it really
I think it's gonna
What? Teenager? As you can tell by the way I do it, I'm not. A former teacher, a retired teacher, is talking to me again. He's retired.
Are you gonna retire?
Well, he's retired. He
Oh.
retired last year, and he's giving me a bad time about that.
But your period for it,
Huh?
our period is like a kid.
Yeah, but then that might lead me to retire next year. Because how can any class ever match it? I'm getting close to retirement, I'll tell you that. I am one of the oldest teachers in the building. Well, Mr. Phillips, we all know that. Mr. Phillips, is he even functioning?
Oh, yeah, he goes.
Oh, I don't know.
He goes.
No one trusts Mr. Phillips.
He goes.
You know,
He
Phillips,
bounces
yeah, he bounces around, right. He should be teaching. You tell Mr. Phillips, you have to become a teacher?
last year.
He needs to. You with me on that?
No. You let me take math in this class.
Where were you yesterday?
That's crazy.
I get it. You still have a lot of work to do. I know. We're now. Even though you got brownies and I get that brownies report. Yeah, Mr. Peterson. Okay, I'm just real fast, I'm checking the stock market. It's had a boom yesterday. There's always like a little bit of a recovery, but it's still doing fairly well. Yeah, I got retirement. All right, so let's get to work. Everyone take out the fornication laws, that packet, and go and look at it very quickly. Quick, sit. We're burning daylight. Quick, sit. Chop. Well, that could become annoying very quickly.